The wolf was stealing her ribbons again. Wren watched him from the kitchen window, with a cup of nettle tea going cold in her hands. He was enormous, black as a chimney flue, and he was standing on his hind legs at her drying line, with a strip of lavender silk clamped delicately between teeth that could have sheared through a deer's spine. He took it down the way a gentleman takes down a lady's coat. Then he trotted off toward the pine wood, with the ribbon streaming behind him like a banner, and Wren said to no one, "That's the fourth one this week." What Wren did not know, and what the whole world north of the river would have fainted to learn, was that the wolf currently decorating his secret den with her ribbons was Kyle Draven, Alpha King of the 9 Packs, terror of the border wars, a man who had once ended a treaty negotiation by breaking a table in half with one hand. The king's den, a hollow beneath the roots of a lightning-split pine, now smelled entirely of lavender and looked like a seamstress's basket had exploded in it. I should stop this, Kyle thought, arranging the new ribbon beside the others with his nose. This is beneath me. This is beneath a common wolf. This is beneath a badger. He fluffed the ribbons into a more comfortable pile and lay down on them. Tomorrow, he thought. Tomorrow I stop. I had been thinking that for 11 days. It had started the way these things start, which is to say, with a lie. Kyle ran the border alone on the last night of every moon, because a king who never leaves his guards forgets what the wind sounds like. And on that particular night the wind had carried something through the pines that stopped him mid-stride. Lavender, and under the lavender, wood smoke, and under the wood smoke, something that made the wolf in him sit down hard in the snow like a struck bell. "Mate," said the wolf. "Absolutely not," said the king. The wolf, as wolves do, won. He had followed the scent to a crooked cottage at the far edge of his own territory, the last dwelling, before the wild lands, the kind of place where exiles washed up. There was a garden of dye plants under burlap for the winter, madder and woad, and rows of lavender, cut back to grey fists. There were drying lines strung between the porch posts, and on the lines, ribbons. Dozens of them. Silk and linen, dyed in colours he had no names for. Colours like the inside of a plum, like river ice at dusk. And there was a girl on the porch in a patched coat, holding a one-winged crow on her fist, feeding it bread soaked in goat's milk, and telling it, seriously, as if the bird owed her money, "You'll fly again by spring, and then you'll owe me 2 years of not screaming at dawn." Kale had meant to look once and leave. That was the plan. Kings have plans. Instead, he had limped out of the tree line. I wanted to be clear, later, with himself, that the limp had been a strategic decision and not begging. He held his right forepaw at an angle he had seen wounded soldiers use, put his ears down, and let his ribs show, which took some doing, because the king ate very well. The girl set the crow on the porch rail and looked at him for a long moment. "That," she said, "is the worst fake limp I have ever seen." Kale froze with his paw in the air. "You're carrying weight on it when you think I'm not looking. And a wolf your size with cracked ribs wouldn't walk, he'd drag." She was already going inside. Her voice floated back through the door. "Lucky for you. I feed liars, too. Everything out here is lying about something." She came back with a clay bowl of stewed rabbit and barley, set it in the snow at the bottom of the steps, and sat down on the porch with her chin in her hands to watch him eat, which no one had dared do since he was 9 years old. "You're too clean to be wild and too rude to be someone's," she said. "I'm going to call you Soot." "Soot," said the wolf, delighted. "We have a name," said the king. "We have 9 names and a coronation title." She had smelled of lavender and lye soap and loneliness. He had eaten the entire bowl and licked it across the yard, and when she laughed, a short, surprised sound like she was out of practice, the wolf had decided, with the finality of an avalanche, that they lived here now. Her name, he learned by shameless eavesdropping, was Wren Halloway. She dyed ribbons and mended prayer banners for the temple in Millbrook, 3 miles of bad road away, and she healed things, not people. Things. The one-winged crow. A fox with mange who slept in her woodshed and hated everyone but her. A hive of bees she talked to while she worked, informing them of the news like they were shut-in aunts. She had been an omega of the Thornmark pack until 4 winters ago, when Alpha Bram had put her out at the gate with 1 bag, in front of everyone, and the only crime anyone would name was that she'd been born with weak blood and no use. Kyle had sat in the dark outside her window the night he learned that, and the growl that came out of him had sent every owl in the pine wood elsewhere. So the ribbons. I did not plan the first theft. He was leaving at dawn, in the honest grey hour when he had to shift and be a king again, and a green ribbon had come loose from the line and blown against his chest, and it smelled like her hands, and the den was very bare, and a den should smell like your mate. That was simply husbandry. That was practically architecture. By the 2nd week, he had a system. By the 3rd week, he had a hoard. The trouble was that ribbons were also currency. Kyle discovered this on a Thursday in his study as a man, in the black coat with the silver clasps that made supplicants stammer when his beta Garrick came in with the tax ledgers and stopped dead. There was a lavender silk ribbon on the floor beside the king's boot. It had fallen out of his coat pocket, where he had absolutely not been keeping it to smell during council meetings. Garrick looked at the ribbon. Garrick looked at the king. Garrick had survived 2 wars and 1 regicide attempt by knowing exactly which things not to see. And he almost made it. But he was only human, more or less. And he said, "Sire, is that a hair ribbon?" "Crows," said the Alpha King, without looking up from the ledger. "This keep has a terrible crow problem. They carry things in through the windows." "The windows are shuttered, sire. It's February." "Determined crows," said the king, and turned a page. Garrick found a 2nd ribbon, a week later, plum-coloured, tucked into the war atlas at the page for the Eastern Marches. He found a 3rd wound around the hilt of the ceremonial dagger on the mantel. "Tied," he noted with a kind of vertigo, in a careful bow. He said nothing. He began, privately, to pray. The thefts escalated, because the wolf was winning every argument now. The blue ribbon went first, off the line, in daylight, while Wren stood 10 feet away rinsing dye pots, because the wolf had learned that if she caught him, she would put her hands on her hips and scold him. And being scolded by her was, the wolf felt, the finest thing that had ever happened to anyone. "Soot, soot, drop it. That one's sold. That's for the miller's daughter's wedding. Drop it, you enormous felon." He dropped it. He picked up the yellow one next to it instead, and left at a dignified trot while she threw a snowball that missed. Then it was the ribbon off her own wrist, slipped free with surgical gentleness while she slept in the garden chair one warm afternoon, her mending in her lap, her mouth open, snoring in a small way she would have died to know about. The wolf took the ribbon and then stood there for a long time looking at her sleeping face, and the king, somewhere inside, quietly stopped pretending this was about ribbons. Then came the gifts, because a wolf who takes must give. That was law older than kings. First a rat, laid on her doorstep, very dead, presented with enormous pride. She thanked him seriously and made stew. Then a pheasant. Then, because the wolf had ambition and access to a royal treasury, a comb of silver and river pearls that had belonged to Kael's grandmother, carried 3 miles in his mouth and deposited, gleaming and slightly damp, in her washing basket. Wren held it up to the light and went white. "Soot, where did you get this? This is... Someone is going to hang me for this. This is a lady's comb. This belongs to some duchess." She crouched and looked into his eyes, and Kael arranged his face into the expression of a simple forest creature. "Did you steal this from a rich traveler? Blink if you robbed a coach." He licked her nose. She kept the comb in a tin under a floorboard and worried about it, and told the bees and the wolf considered the gift a triumph. And then there was the bed. It was the coldest night of the winter, the kind of cold that came under the door like a live thing. And Wren had banked the fire and buried herself under every blanket she owned, and at some black hour she woke because the mattress ropes were groaning and a weight like a landed rowboat was settling against her back. Heat poured off him like a hearthstone. She should have been terrified. 180 pounds of predator had opened her latch, with his teeth, apparently, and gotten into her bed. She lay there rigid for a full minute. The wolf sighed through his nose, a vast, contented gale, and put his chin on her shoulder. "One night," she said into the dark. "This is not a habit." Downstairs, the latch he had broken swung gently in the draught. It became a habit. In the mornings, he was always gone before she woke, which she found tactful and slightly sad, and which was in fact the king of the 9 packs, sprinting 3 miles through the dawn woods, shifting behind the stables, and walking into the council chamber with pine needles in his hair, while 11 old wolves pretended not to notice. "You seem rested, sire," said Councilwoman Maren, who noticed everything. "I sleep well in winter," said the king. Said Maren. "There's a lavender smell." "Crows," said the king. "I nearly lost it all on the morning of the first thaw." He'd stayed too long, passed grey into gold, warm and stupid, with her hand resting in his fur. And the sun came up, and the shift came with it, the way it did at true dawn after a full moon, rolling up his spine like thunder wanting out. He had thrown himself off the bed and out the door, and made it to the tree line just as his bones began to sing, and behind him he heard her sleepy voice calling, "Soot?" He shifted in the shadow of the pines, a man on his knees in the snow, gasping, and when he looked back, she was standing in the doorway in her nightgown, looking straight at the trees where he crouched. For 3 heartbeats, neither of them moved. "Weird dog," she said, finally, and went back inside, and Kael, Alpha King, terror of the border wars, sat naked in a snowbank, with his heart going like a rabbit's. The summons came in March, and he told himself it was coincidence, which was a lie, because he had personally instructed the temple at Millbrook that the coronation anniversary banners were to be restored by the finest dye hand in the region, and had then stared at the temple steward until the steward said the name Kael was waiting for, which is how Wren Halloway came to the keep in her good dress, which was her bad dress with the patches turned inward, carrying her dye box, and met the Alpha King as a man. She had seen him once before, at a distance, at the exile trials the year Thornmark cast her out. A black figure on a dais who had signed the paper that made her nothing. Up close, he was worse. He was a full head taller than her, and he looked at her, the way winter looks at a garden, and his eyes were a strange, pale gold that snagged something in the back of her mind and let it go before she could hold it. "The banners," he said. "The gold thread is failing. The blue has gone grey. Can you save them or not? I can save them. She lifted her chin. It'll take 6 weeks, and I don't work cheap for people who scowl. Behind the king, Garrick made a sound like a man swallowing a bee. There was a silence, in which the last 3 people who had spoken to the king that way were presumably remembered by their loved ones. 6 weeks, said the king. You'll have a workroom in the East Tower. And he turned and left, coat swinging, and did not tell her that the East Tower workroom had the best light in the keep, that he had checked at 2 in the morning as a wolf walking the corridors while the guards very carefully looked elsewhere. So began the strangest spring of Wren's life. By day she worked gold thread and wove blue in a tower room, and the Cold King found reasons to pass by, and stood in the doorway, asking short questions about mordants and thread counts as if he were interrogating a spy. And she answered tartly, and sometimes, very rarely, one corner of his mouth moved a 1/4 inch, and she caught herself working for that 1/4 inch like it was wages. By night she walked home the 3 miles, and the black wolf met her at the halfway oak, every night without fail, and paced beside her hip like a shadow with opinions. She talked to the wolf. That was the thing about the wolf. He had no one to tell. The king watched me work for an hour today, and then said my selvage was crooked. My selvage was perfect. I think he liked it. I think that's how he says things. He's like a door that's been painted shut. You can see there's a room behind it. But she kicked a stone down the road. His eyes are like yours, did you know that? Exactly that color. Isn't that strange? The wolf coughed. Another night, quieter, with rain coming. You want to know why Thornmark put me out? The real Her voice went thin. Alpha Bram promised me to a trader from the coast. 40 silver and a mule. I found the paper. I was 16. I ran the night before the handover, and they caught me at the river. And Bram stood there in front of everyone and said, I had weak blood and no use, because that was easier than saying I was a debt he couldn't collect. Everyone in that pack knew me since I was born. Nobody said one word. She stopped walking. The wolf pressed his whole side against her legs, hard, holding her up. So don't you ever let anybody sell you soot. You bite them. You bite them, and you come here. She could not see, in the dark, that the wolf's hackles had risen from his neck to his tail, or that his eyes had gone the flat gold of a forge. The next morning, 3 miles away, the Alpha King summoned his master of records and said, in a voice that made the man's hands shake, Bring me everything on Thornmark, everything. Start with the sales. Then Prince Aldrich came and ruined everything, briefly. I was a southern prince on a treaty visit, all velvet and easy laughter. And he found Wren in the East Tower on his 2nd day, and decided, in the way of men who have never been told no by anything except weather, that she was the most charming thing in the keep. He brought her hothouse oranges. He sat on her work table. He told her the dye on her fingers looked like a duchess's rings, which was a good line, and she laughed at it, because it was funny, and because oranges were oranges. The Alpha King walked past the open door at exactly that moment. Witnesses disagreed afterward about the sound. Garrick maintained it was the stone door frame settling. The door frame had a crack in it afterward in the shape of a hand. The king did not enter. The king went to the training yard and dismantled 3 sparring dummies down to the sand, and the wolf inside him howled, Ours, 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 say it, coward, say it as a man, and the king, for the first time in his reign, had no counter-argument. That night, the wolf did not meet her at the halfway oak. He was already at the cottage when she arrived, sitting on her porch like a thundercloud. And when she reached for the door, he shoved his head under her hand and made a sound she'd never heard from him, low and cracked and miserable. "Hey. Hey. What is it?" She sat right down on the cold boards and took his huge head in her lap, and he shuddered. "Bad day. Me too. There's a prince who gave me oranges, and I think the king's angry at me for it. He looked at me at dinner like... I don't know how he looked at me." Her fingers worked through the black fur. "Here's the stupid thing, Soot. Here's the truly stupid thing. And if you repeat it, I'll shave you." She bent low over his ear and whispered it into the fur like a girl putting a secret down a well. "I didn't want the prince's oranges. I wanted the door painted shut." The wolf stopped breathing. "I know," she said. "Believe me, I know." Bram came for her 9 days later. He came at dusk, with 4 thorn-mark wolves at his back. And he came smiling, which was how Wren knew it was bad, because she remembered that smile from the riverbank when she was 16. He stood in her garden, crushing the new lavender under his boots, and explained reasonably that the exile had been reconsidered. That word of her gifted hands had traveled. That an omega healer of her quality belonged with her birth pack, where her value could be. And he used this word, realized. The coast trader's grandson, it turned out, was still interested. The price had gone up considerably. "I'm under the king's employ," Wren said. Her voice stayed level. Her hand behind her back closed on the porch rail. "The king," said Bram, "signed your exile himself, girl. You think he remembers your name?" And for one moment, one strange moment, Bram's smile faltered, and he looked at the drying lines, at all the ribbons moving in the wind, and something old crossed his face. "Your mother died like that," he said, quieter, almost to himself. "Whole pack wore her colors at the moon feasts. I carried her beer, you know, before everything." Then his jaw set, and the moment closed like a trap, and he was reaching for Wren's arm. "Debts are debts. Take her." The pinewood exploded. He came out of the trees, like the dark itself had grown teeth, and he did not go around the fence. He came through it, and he put himself between Wren and 5 grown wolves, with his head lower than his shoulders, and a sound coming out of him that was not a growl, but a sentence, a promise, a legal ruling. 2 of the Thornmark men shifted. It did not help them. It was over in less time than it takes to tell, and it ended with Bram flat on his back in his own crushed lavender, with the black wolf's jaws around his throat, not closing, just resting there, the way a knife rests on a whetstone. "Soot," Wren whispered. "Soot, don't." And the wolf looked back at her, and she saw his eyes, really saw them, in the last light. And the thing in the back of her mind that had snagged and slipped free all winter, finally caught and held. The wolf stepped off Bram, and then, in her garden, in front of her, because there was no more room left in the world for the lie. He shifted. It rolled over him like weather, black fur to black coat. And then the alpha king of the 9 packs was standing barefoot in her lavender, with her ribbon marks still pressed into his shoulder, and he said, in the voice from the council chamber, without taking his eyes off her, "Alpha Bram of Thornmark, you are under arrest for trafficking in persons, falsification of exile documents, and trespass on the person of," his voice cracked right down the middle, "king to man, of my mate." The Thornmark wolves ran. The guards, who had never been more than a quarter-mile from her cottage in weeks. She'd learned that later too. Came out of the trees and took Bram away. And then the garden was empty and quiet. And it was just the two of them and the wreckage of the fence. "Wren," said the king, "don't." She had her arms wrapped around herself. She was looking at him the way you look at a floor that's just moved. The eyes. I said it to your face. I said your eyes were. And you coughed. You coughed. Her voice was climbing. The bath. I bathed you. I scrubbed mud out of you with lye soap and complained about my back. And you were, the whole time you were. I told you things. And there it was, the wound under the wound, and her eyes were bright and furious. I told you about the river. I told you about the trader. I whispered things into your ear that I have never said out loud to a living soul. Because you weren't supposed to be a soul, you were supposed to be a dog. I know, you slept in my bed for 4 months. I know, you broke my latch. I'll fix the latch. And the ribbons, she said, and stopped. Wait, the ribbons? That was you. 61 ribbons, I counted. I thought I was going mad. I blamed the crows. I apologized to the crow. Kael. I apologized to an actual crow. That, said the Alpha King of the 9 packs, was also me. All of it was me. The comb was my grandmother's. The rabbit I'm actually still proud of. The ribbons are in a den under the split pine. And I want you to know that I arranged them by color, and that Garrick has been finding them in my coat all winter, and that I told the Royal Council, twice in session, that the keep has a crow problem. He took 1 step closer, hands open, King's voice gone entirely. Nothing left but the man, and the man was terrified. I should have told you the first week. I knew it, and I didn't, because the wolf got everything. The wolf got your secrets and your bed and your hands in his fur, and the man got scolded about selvage, and I was jealous, Wren, of myself. I have been jealous of myself since February. Punish me however you want, but don't ask me to leave, because I've tried every dawn for 4 months, and I can't. The wind moved the drying lines. Somewhere in the woodshed, the fox who hated everyone knocked something over. "Get out of my garden," Wren said. I went white. He bowed, actually bowed, and turned. "And come back tomorrow," she said, to his back, arms still crossed, chin up. "At a decent hour, through the gate, on 2 legs, and bring my ribbons, all 61. And then you can start explaining yourself from the beginning, slowly. And it is going to take you weeks, and you are going to fix my fence." He came back at dawn. Of course he did. He came up the road on foot with no guards and no crown, and a wooden box in his arms. And he knelt down right there in the mud at her gate, and opened it. And there were the ribbons, all 61, clean, folded, arranged by color, smelling faintly of pine and of him. It took her a long time to look up from the box. When she did, her eyes were wet and her mouth was fighting itself. "You folded them. I've had them 4 months. I wasn't raised in a barn." He paused. "I was partially raised in a barn." She laughed, that short, surprised sound out of practice, and he closed his eyes at it like a man hearing rain after a drought. The claiming came at the moon feast, because these things must be done before the packs, or they are not done at all. The great hall was full, all 9 packs, the council in their grey furs, Prince Aldrich looking rueful and drinking heavily, and Lady Sable of the Western Pack, who had been groomed for the Luna's crown since girlhood, and had sat through the king's announcement with a face like carved ice. It was Sable who found Wren alone by the cloakroom before the ceremony, and Wren braced for claws, and instead Sable pressed something into her hand. It was a ribbon, lavender silk, one of the sold ones, the miller's daughters, bought back at triple price. "I was going to burn it in front of you," Sable said. Her voice was flat and tired, and underneath, very young. "I've been for sale since I was 12. Fathers, councils, crowns. You're the first one anybody ever actually chose." She smoothed her skirts, ice again. "Don't embarrass us. Stand up straight." And she walked into the hall ahead of Wren, and when the murmuring started, was seen to be the first to bow. The king stood before the 9 packs, with Wren's hand in his, and said, "What kings say?" The old word, the binding ones. But when he came to the end, to the part where the alpha declares possession, where every alpha in that hall expected the thunder of "She is mine," he turned instead and knelt, crown and all, on the stone in front of an exiled Omega ribbon dyer, and it was Wren who spoke into the enormous silence. "He's mine," she said. "I fed him first. Pack law, ask anyone." The hall did not know whether to gasp or laugh, and so it did both, and then it roared. Bram went north to the ice mines, with his ledgers entered into evidence in every pack court in the kingdom, and Thornmark got a new alpha, a quiet woman who sent Wren a letter of apology that Wren read 4 times and answered once, briefly, which was more than nothing and less than forgiveness, which felt about right. Summer came. The split pine still stood at the edge of the pinewood, and under its roots the den remained, because Wren had refused to let him clear it out. She'd inspected it instead, on her hands and knees, a queen crawling into a hole in the ground, while her royal guard studied the horizon with great professionalism, and she'd come out with dirt on her nose and pronounced the color arrangement actually not bad. On the last warm evening of August, she sat against the pine's trunk, with new-dyed ribbons drying on a line strung between 2 branches, and the black wolf lay with his head heavy in her lap, one ear twitching against her palm, half asleep, wholly hers. The one-winged crow, who flew now, badly, in furious loops, landed on the line, sidled along it like a thief in a story, and made off with a strip of plum silk into the pines. The wolf's head shot up. He stared after the bird. He looked at Wren. He looked back at the empty line, at the space where the ribbon had been, with an expression of vast, wounded, personal betrayal. Wren scratched behind his ear and pulled his head back down into her lap. "I know," she said. "Terrible crow problem around here."